Bryson Kane had one rule he lived by for 18 years. Own the ground beneath you. Never let someone else control your foundation. He was 42 years old, a real estate developer operating quietly out of Atlanta, Georgia. No flashy billboards, no social media reels showing off his portfolio. Just numbers, patience, and land. Always the land. He drove a modest black Lexus, wore the same 3 suits on rotation, and kept his name off every press release his firm ever issued. The people who needed to know who Bryson Kane was, they already knew. His wife of 14 years, Nadia, was 36, beautiful in the way that costs money to maintain. Flawless skin, designer everything, a smile that could stop traffic on Peachtree Street. She had grown up poor in Southwest Atlanta, and she never forgot it. That fear of returning to nothing was the engine inside her. You had to understand that to understand everything that came after. They had one son, Aiden, 15 years old, lean, and so emotionally sensitive that the world seemed to press against him like wind against a glass door. He wore headphones everywhere. He read constantly. He had his father's eyes, deep and watchful, and none of his mother's appetite for surface-level things. For 14 years, Bryson believed the marriage was difficult but survivable. He was wrong. And what Nadia never understood, what she couldn't have understood, was that Bryson had been quietly, patiently, methodically preparing for this exact moment for the last 12 years. It was a Tuesday night in October when the Atlanta skyline outside their penthouse windows looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Rain moved in from the south, slow and heavy, the kind that makes the whole city go quiet. Bryson had been sitting at the kitchen table reviewing property surveys, a mug of black coffee steaming beside a stack of white documents. He didn't hear Nadia come in. She dropped a manila envelope on the table so hard the coffee jumped and splashed across the papers. Dark stains spread like ink across clean white pages. He looked up. She was standing across from him in a cream-colored silk blouse, arms folded, chin lifted. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no grief, nothing that looked like 14 years of shared life. "I want a divorce." Her voice was cold and precise as a scalpel. "I'm taking everything, the penthouse, the Buckhead mansion, the 2 Mercedes, the art collection, and $4 million in cash." Bryson set down his coffee mug. Slowly. She wasn't finished. "As for Aiden?" A small, dismissive wave of her hand. "You can keep him." The words landed like something physical. Bryson turned his head toward the sliding glass door that opened onto the rain-soaked terrace. Aiden was standing there. He had been standing there the whole time. A book was in his hands. The Alchemist, the copy his father had given him for his 12th birthday. And it slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull, hollow thud. Tears were already running down his face, silent and steady, the way tears fall when a child has been hurt so many times that crying out loud no longer seems worth the effort. Rain hammered the windows behind him. Bryson rose slowly to his feet. "So my wife is walking out. And our son is disposable now?" Nadia actually laughed. She reached up and adjusted a strand of hair with one finger, the way you'd brush away something that barely registered. "He's dark, depressed, too much like you." She turned toward the mirror above the bar cart and checked her lipstick. "I'm starting a new chapter. I'm not carrying that kind of weight into my next life." Aiden disappeared into the dark hallway without a word. Bryson watched the space where his son had been standing. His right hand, resting at his side, curled slowly into a fist. He stayed that way for a long moment, not frozen, but thinking, calculating, the way a builder thinks when he already knows exactly where the foundation sits. Then he turned and looked at the far wall. An abstract painting, oil on canvas. something Nadia had chosen years ago because it matched the furniture. $140,000 of artwork that meant nothing to either of them, and everything to both their egos. A faint smile crossed Bryson's face, just the corners of his mouth, just for a moment. Then it was gone. His voice, when he finally spoke, was so low and steady it could have passed for a man reading the weather forecast. "All right, Nadia. You can have everything you asked for." She blinked. She had been bracing for an argument, raised voices, a scene, something. His calm seemed to confuse her, and confusion is an uncomfortable feeling. So she picked up her purse from the counter, gave him one final look, the kind that says, "I already won," and walked out. The rain kept falling. The coffee stain kept spreading across the white documents. And somewhere in the back of a filing cabinet inside Bryson Kane's downtown office, a folder sat exactly where he had placed it 12 years earlier, labeled in plain block letters, "Phoenix Legacy Project, Aidan Kane Irrevocable Trust, established 2012. What was inside that folder, and why Bryson had been quietly building it since Aidan was barely old enough to walk, is what changes everything you think you just witnessed. She took everything and left her own son behind. Type 1 if she deserved what was coming. Type 2 if a mother should never lose her child, no matter what. Drop your story below. Bryson made one phone call the next morning. Not to a friend, not to family, not to anyone who would try to talk him out of what he had already decided. He called Aisha Thompson. If you moved in Atlanta's legal world, you knew Aisha Thompson the way you knew a storm system by name, by reputation, by the careful way people lowered their voices in courthouse hallways when she was mentioned. She was 45, sharp as a straight razor, and had never once confused sentiment with strategy. They called her the Iron Lady of Peachtree Plaza, and she had earned every syllable of that name. Bryson's instructions were simple. Draft the settlement exactly the way my wife is asking for it. Every asset, every number, every dollar. A brief pause. With one addition. She permanently surrenders all parental rights and any legal claim connected to Aidan. Silence on the other end. Then Aisha said carefully, "Bryson, do you have documented proof of abandonment and emotional harm? Without something the court can hold in its hands, that clause won't survive a challenge." "Check your secure inbox," he said. "I've been sending you files for 11 years. A longer silence. "Lord have mercy," she said quietly. The documentation was thorough in a way that took the breath away. Not one folder, not one flash drive. 11 years of careful, methodical record-keeping that no one had known was happening. Video recordings of Aidan sitting alone at midnight, crying in the dark of his room. Photographs of a 7-year-old boy standing outside Ponce de Leon Avenue Elementary in the rain for 3 hours. 3 hours, waiting for his mother, who had been in Savannah that weekend with someone who was not her husband. A school counselor's written assessment from 2019 noting that Aidan showed signs of consistent emotional neglect. Teacher statements, neighbor statements, text messages stretching across nearly a decade. A thread that documented, in Nadia's own words, a pattern of choosing her own comfort over her child, again and again and again. Aisha reviewed every page. Then she called back and said simply, "We're ready." Within 3 weeks, Bryson signed over every visible asset. The penthouse on Peachtree Road, the Buckhead Mansion on West Paces Ferry Road, the 2 Mercedes in the private garage, the art collection. $4 million transferred to Nadia's account on a Wednesday afternoon like a routine utility payment. He signed it all, calmly, without a single word of protest. The judge glanced at him over her glasses once, the look a person gives when they sense a trap but cannot yet locate it, and then moved on. Nadia walked out of that preliminary hearing like a woman who had won the war before the first real battle. By Friday, she had posted 17 times. New freedom begins. Within days, a man named Derek had moved into the penthouse. He was 34, a fitness influencer with a bright smile and an expensive lifestyle built largely on borrowed appearances. Their posts together filled up with rooftop dinners, designer shopping along Buckhead Avenue, and champagne at midnight. The comments were enthusiastic. Meanwhile, Bryson and Aiden moved into a two-bedroom apartment in Decatur. Beige carpet. A kitchen where the second burner ran a little hot. A view of the parking lot and, if you craned your neck just right, a strip of Georgia pine trees turning gold in the November light. The first night, Bryson heard a sound from Aiden's room around midnight. He knocked. No answer. He opened the door. Aiden was sitting in the corner on the floor, back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. His headphones were around his neck for once. His eyes were red, and his face carried the expression of someone who had been holding something enormous for far too long. He looked up at his father. "I just want everything to stop," he whispered. Bryson didn't reach for the right words, because in that moment, there weren't any. He crossed the room, lowered himself to the floor, and pulled his son into his arms. And then Bryson Kane, a man who had held his composure in courtrooms, boardrooms, and through every hard moment of a 14-year marriage, finally let go. Because sitting on that beige carpet in Decatur, he understood with complete clarity that the deepest failure of his life had not been trusting the wrong person. It had been spending years behind a desk, emotionally absent, convincing himself that providing financially was the same thing as being present. While Aiden sat alone in a mansion on West Paces Ferry Road and quietly broke into pieces, Bryson had been closing deals. He pressed his son's head against his shoulder and said, his voice unsteady, "I'm going to fix this, but you have to help me. You have to learn how to stand on your own ground." Aiden didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. In the weeks that followed, something in the apartment began to shift, slowly, the way seasons change, not all at once, but in small, accumulating ways that eventually become undeniable. Bryson started talking to his son at night, not lecturing from a distance. Sitting at the kitchen table with takeout pizza from a place on Commerce Drive, talking the way two people talk when they've decided to stop pretending things are fine. Aiden started sharing small things, observations, frustrations, the kind of daily details that pile up in silence when there's no one listening to receive them. One evening, Bryson spread a property map across the table and told Aiden the principle that had shaped everything he had built. "Greedy people only see the beautiful building," he said. "They look at the glass and the steel and the view, and they think that's the thing worth having. Wise people look at what's underneath. They inspect the ground first." Aiden studied the map. "And what's underneath our ground?" Bryson looked at his son steadily. "Something your mother will never own," he said. He reached into the filing cabinet in the corner of the living room and placed a thick folder on the table between them. Phoenix Legacy Project. Aiden Kane Irrevocable Trust. Established 2012. Aiden stared at it. "Dad." His voice was slow and careful. "How long have you been planning this?" Bryson sat back in his chair. "Since you were 3 years old." What was actually structured inside that trust, and why it meant that Nadia hadn't just lost a divorce, but walked step by step into a legal arrangement she had helped construct herself, is where this story becomes something else entirely. Day 47 of the proceedings, Fulton County Superior Court, Courtroom 7B. The room smelled of old paper and recycled air, and it carried the particular stillness of a place where lives get rearranged permanently. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Outside the tall, narrow windows, Atlanta was doing what it does in late January. Gray sky, cold drizzle. the kind of weather that makes everything feel like a verdict already delivered. Nadia arrived in a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than a month's rent on the Decatur apartment. Derek sat beside her, wearing a well-fitted suit and a confident expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Her attorney shuffled papers at the plaintiff's table with practiced authority. Across the aisle, Aisha Thompson sat in navy blue, reading glasses on, one strand of pearls at her collar. She had said fewer than 12 words since the session opened. Bryson sat beside her, hands flat on the table, completely still. Nadia barely looked at him. She had already won. Today was a formality. Before the session moves forward, it's worth stepping outside the drama for a moment. Because what is about to happen is not simply a legal reversal. It is the endpoint of a very specific psychological pattern that had been running quietly for 14 years. Psychologists who study high-conflict divorces describe something called cognitive tunneling, the narrowing of perception that occurs when a person is driven primarily by fear or urgency. Nadia had spent her adult life running from the poverty of her childhood, and that fear had shaped the way she processed decisions. She could see the goal directly ahead, the penthouse, the cash, the freedom, with perfect clarity. What the tunnel blocked was everything at the edges, the details she didn't examine, the questions she didn't think to ask. Most critically, why is he agreeing to all of this without a single objection? She had registered Bryson's calm in the preliminary hearings. She had noticed the faint, unreadable smile. She had filed both away as arrogance, as resignation, and moved forward. The tunnel wouldn't allow for a more unsettling interpretation. Bryson had understood this about her for years. He had structured every step of the process to work precisely with that tunnel, not against it. He gave my wife exactly what she demanded, exactly when she demanded it, exactly as she had written it down herself. He had counted on her not reading carefully. He had counted correctly. The judge called the session to order. Aisha Thompson stood. What happened in the next 11 minutes rearranged the atmosphere of that courtroom the way a pressure change moves through a room before a storm. Aisha approached the bench with a single bound document and presented it without preamble. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce the founding documents of the Aidan Kane Irrevocable Trust, established August 14, 2012, in the state of Georgia. A murmur moved through the gallery. Nadia tilted her head, puzzled, not yet alarmed. The land parcels underlying both the Peachtree Road penthouse and the West Paces Ferry Road property, Aisha continued, her voice carrying the careful weight of someone delivering information she has held for a very long time, were transferred into the Aidan Kane Irrevocable Trust on September 1, 2012. The physical structures, the penthouse, the mansion, were subsequently built on ground that is legally owned not by Bryson Kane, not by Nadia Kane, but by this trust. She let that land. A trust whose sole beneficiary is Aidan Kane, minor child, age 15. The room went very quiet. Furthermore, the ground lease attached to both properties, a 20-year commercial lease permitting the structures to occupy the land, expired on October 14th of this year, which is, as the court will note, a brief pause, the exact date the divorce settlement transferred ownership of those structures to Nadia Kane. Here is what a psychologist observing from the gallery would notice at this precise moment. Watch Nadia's face. Not the shock. That comes half a second later and is obvious to everyone. Watch the fraction of a second before the shock fully registers, when the information is landing but hasn't yet been processed completely. There is a flicker of something older than panic, something that looks, briefly, like recognition. This is what clinicians call post hoc cognitive dissonance, the instant when all the details you ignored because they were inconvenient to your plan flood back simultaneously. The strange calm, the unopposed signings, the smile toward the painting on the wall. In that fraction of a second, Nadia's mind was reassembling everything she had dismissed and arriving at the interpretation she had refused to consider. She had known he was smarter than this. She had always known. She just hadn't been willing to slow down long enough to ask what that meant. Nadia's attorney was on his feet. Your Honor, this was not disclosed in the original asset inventory. The ground lease, Aisha said evenly, is a separate legal instrument from the property structures and was never a marital asset. It was placed in the child's irrevocable trust 12 years ago. The court's own records confirm the filing date and the terms. The judge was reading, carefully, with the stillness of someone beginning to understand the shape of something significant. Then she ruled. Nadia technically owned 2 buildings, on land belonging to her own son's trust fund. Land she could not purchase, could not claim, and could not negotiate away. Because the trust was irrevocable, and because 4 weeks ago, in a preliminary hearing she had entered with complete confidence, she had signed a document permanently surrendering all parental rights and any legal connection to Aiden Kane. She had signed herself out of every possible remedy. Every one of Nadia's additional demands, spousal support, extended cash payments, further claims, was rejected. The ground lease default was acknowledged, placing her in unlawful occupancy of both properties until she either began paying the trust's lease rate or vacated. The lease rate, calculated by the trust's property management firm, $55,000 per month. Back payments owed from the date of occupancy, $620,000. Aisha leaned across the table toward Nadia and said 4 words, quietly enough that only Nadia and the court reporter heard them. The land belongs to Aiden. From the 3rd row of the gallery, Derek heard the numbers clearly. Now, it is worth pausing on Derek here, because his response is instructive in a way that goes beyond the obvious. Derek had not pursued Nadia out of love, or even genuine attraction. He had pursued her the way a particular kind of person pursues opportunity. By identifying someone who appeared to have resources, attaching himself to those resources, and treating the relationship as a vehicle toward a lifestyle he wanted, but had not built for himself. Researchers who study relationship patterns describe this as instrumental attachment, a bond that is not built on the person themselves, but on what that person appears to provide. The math on what Nadia provided had just changed dramatically. Derek processed that math in approximately 8 seconds. He stood up. He gave Nadia one look, not angry, not apologetic, simply the flat and already decided look of a man completing a calculation, and walked out of courtroom 7B without a word. The door swung shut behind him. Nadia turned. He was gone. She looked back at the room. People in the gallery were whispering. 2 had their phones out, not photographing documents, but filming her face. Filming the precise moment the woman who had posted "New Freedom Begins" 3 weeks ago understood what she had actually walked into. The humiliation was not just legal. It was being witnessed and distributed in real time by the same audience that had cheered for her. Nadia sat very still in the buzzing fluorescent light of courtroom 7B, rain tapping quietly at the tall, narrow windows, and understood with the cold clarity that only total loss can produce that she had not won anything. Greed rarely announces itself honestly. It arrives dressed as self-preservation, as ambition, as "I deserve better." It whispers those things for years, building a life on a surface that looks exactly like success, right up until the moment the ground underneath is examined and found to belong to someone else entirely. But Nadia's collapse was only halfway complete, because the worst blow wasn't the land and it wasn't the money. It was something she had discarded herself, with her own signature, long before she understood what it was worth. Desperation makes people move fast and think slow. Within 72 hours of the court ruling, Nadia listed the Buckhead mansion at $4.8 million. She had it professionally staged, flowers on the dining table, afternoon light angled through the rear windows, the kind of listing photography that makes a property look like a life someone else is already living beautifully. It was a compelling listing for a compelling building. Not a single serious offer came in, because every serious buyer in Atlanta had a real estate attorney, and every real estate attorney could read a title report. The land beneath the mansion on West Paces Ferry Road was leased from a minor child's irrevocable trust. The lease rate was $55,000 a month. The relationship between the current occupant and the trust's beneficiary was, according to publicly filed court documents, legally hostile. Any investor with working eyes would see immediately that they were being asked to pay premium prices for a structure sitting on fundamentally compromised ground. Nadia dropped the asking price to $4.2 million, then $3.8, then $3.2. She sat at the kitchen counter of the penthouse each morning, refreshing the listing portal on her phone, watching the number she had once treated as her prize erode day by day, like watching something dissolve from the inside before it falls apart on the outside. Meanwhile, the lease payments compounded, interest stacked onto interest. Her attorney's office sent increasingly formal invoices. The art collection, already transferred to her name in the settlement, turned out to be worth considerably less once buyers understood the circumstances surrounding its sale. There is a term in clinical psychology for what Nadia was experiencing during these weeks: narcissistic collapse. It sounds dramatic, but it describes something quite precise. For most of her adult life, Nadia's sense of herself, her identity, her confidence, her daily sense of safety had been constructed around external proof of status. The penthouse, the designer wardrobe, the social media following. These were not simply luxuries to her. They were the ongoing evidence, renewed daily, that she had escaped the poverty of Southwest Atlanta and would never return to it. Therapists call this kind of identity structure externally scaffolded. It depends entirely on the continued presence of visible, confirmable markers. Remove the markers, and there is no internal structure left to hold the self upright. Bryson had spent 12 years building something underneath the surface. Nadia had spent 12 years perfecting the surface itself. The difference between those two approaches is, in many ways, the entire story. Her online presence collapsed the same way the property listing did, not all at once, but through a process that fed on itself. The original posts had been screenshotted and were circulating in communities she had never encountered: financial forums, relationship advice groups. A YouTube channel that covered high-profile divorce cases posted a breakdown of the court ruling, referencing her by name. Within days, the comments on her own posts had shifted from celebration to something harder and more public. She walked her accounts, then went private, then went silent. What is worth noting psychologically is this: for Nadia, the loss of that audience may have been as destabilizing as the loss of the properties themselves. The platform had functioned as what some therapists describe as an external validation supply, a continuous stream of reassurance that substituted for the internal security she had never developed. When that supply was cut off suddenly and reversed into its opposite, the effect was not simply embarrassing, it was structurally destabilizing, in a way that someone with a more internally grounded sense of self would not have experienced as acutely. She had built everything on what could be seen. She had nothing left when the seeing stopped. 3 weeks after the ruling, the trust presented its formal offer: $850,000, combined, for both the penthouse and the mansion structures. $7 million had been their combined appraised value. Nadia sat at the kitchen counter for 40 minutes after her attorney called. She looked out at the Atlanta skyline one last time. Those scattered city lights she had once photographed with the caption, "My view, my life," and did the accounting she should have done at the beginning of all this. She had no countering position, no leverage, no time. She signed the transfer papers. The final signing took place in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue. Neutral ground. No gallery, no recording devices, no crowd. Just attorneys, fluorescent light, and the quiet sound of papers being moved across a table. Nadia signed the first document, then the second. Her hand moved mechanically, the way it moves when your attention is somewhere the paperwork can't reach. Then she came to a line she had seen before. Permanent surrender of all parental rights and legal claims connected to Aiden Kane, minor child. Her own signature, her own date. She stared at it for several seconds. Across the table, Bryson Kane rose to his feet. What Bryson does in this moment is worth examining carefully, because it is the clearest window into who he actually is. He does not raise his voice. He does not perform anger for the room. Most people, after 12 years of careful preparation and months of legal proceedings, would feel entirely entitled to a dramatic confrontation, to delivering their vindication at volume, to making sure everyone present understood the full weight of what had been done to them. Bryson does none of that. Researchers who study emotional regulation describe what he demonstrates as strategic equanimity, the capacity to remain grounded, precise, and fully present at the moment of maximum emotional charge. Not because you feel nothing, but because you feel it completely and have decided long in advance how to carry it. It is the opposite of suppression. It is the mark of a person who processed his grief in a Decatur apartment at midnight, on the floor, holding his son, and came to this room already resolved. He looked at Nadia steadily and said, in a voice as level as a property survey, "I knew about your relationship with Derek since Aiden was 3 years old." The room did not change, but the air in it shifted. I knew about each one before him. I knew about the Savannah weekend. I knew about the 2 years before that. A pause, not for effect, because he meant every word and wanted them delivered precisely. I never used a prenuptial agreement because I needed my wife to believe she was walking into a windfall. I needed her to sign everything willingly. He stepped back slightly from the table. You didn't just lose your assets today, Nadia. You began losing everything the moment you left a 7-year-old boy standing in the rain on Ponce de Leon Avenue for 3 hours, because you had somewhere else to be. Then Aiden walked in from the corridor. He was taller than Nadia had remembered, or perhaps she had simply never paid close enough attention to notice when he was growing. He wore a gray hoodie and dark jeans, hands in his pockets, his father's eyes quiet and steady as he took in the room. He stood beside Bryson. He looked at the woman across the table. From the perspective of someone observing this moment from the outside, what Aiden does next is important to understand accurately. It is not revenge. Revenge requires ongoing anger, and what Aiden had arrived at over the past months was something beyond anger. Something quieter and more final. Grief counselors describe a stage in the healing process of children who experienced parental abandonment as symbolic severance. The moment when a child who has cycled for years through grief, hope, anger, and renewed hope finally reaches a stable internal truth. Not hardness, not bitterness, just the clear-eyed recognition that a particular door has been permanently closed, and that their life, their identity, and their future are entirely on the other side of it. What came out of Aiden's mouth was not cruelty. It was the simple, settled truth of a boy who had stopped waiting. "My mother died when I was 5, he said, quietly and without hesitation. "The woman standing here is someone I don't know." The sound that came out of Nadia in that conference room was something she had not planned. It came from somewhere beneath all of it. The composure, the coat, the constructed self she had maintained across 14 years of marriage and months of proceedings. She collapsed to her knees. She reached toward her son. Here is the hardest truth of this entire story, and it deserves to be stated directly. Nadia's grief in that moment was genuine. Whatever love she had carried for Aiden, however distorted by fear and self-preservation and years of choosing her own comfort first, it was real. People are rarely entirely one thing. She had not been entirely without feeling. But love that is never acted on, never shown up for, never chosen over convenience when it actually costs something, that love means nothing to the child who waited. You cannot present a 15-year-old with the bill for feelings he never received. The love has to be demonstrated in the moments when it is inconvenient, when it requires sacrifice, when the child is standing in the rain and you are the one who is supposed to come. Aiden turned away. He walked out of the room beside his father. The door closed. Nadia knelt on the floor of a Peachtree Center Avenue conference room, in a city that no longer recognized her, in a life she had dismantled with her own choices, and understood at last and completely what she had traded and for what. They say justice takes time. What nobody tells you is that when it finally arrives, it doesn't announce itself. It simply stands very still and lets the truth speak for itself. That Friday night, Bryson and Aiden ate pizza on the living room floor of the Decatur apartment. Not at the kitchen table, on the floor, with the box open between them and a basketball game on the television that neither of them was actually watching. Because they were talking. Genuinely talking. The way they had been slowly learning to talk over the previous weeks, without the careful distance that Bryson had spent too many years maintaining between himself and the people who needed him most. After the second slice, Bryson pulled a document from the folder on the coffee table and set it in front of his son. "This is the formal beneficiary designation," he said. "It names you as the controlling beneficiary of the trust when you turn 21. Until then, I manage it on your behalf." He smoothed the document flat with one hand. "But before you sign anything, I need you to understand something." Aiden set down his pizza and looked at the document with the seriousness he gave to things that mattered. "Property and money are not for showing off," Bryson said. "They are a responsibility, a foundation. You don't build on top of someone else's ground and call it yours. You don't build at all until you understand what's underneath." He looked at his son directly. "That means you develop real skills. You learn to work with your own mind and your own hands. Whatever you build in this life, you need to know that the ground under it belongs to you, because you earned it." Aiden was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll do better than you did, Dad." Bryson looked at him. "Not to compete with you," Aiden continued, choosing his words carefully, "but because I've watched you, I know where you went wrong, and I don't want to make those same mistakes." A pause. "I never want to become someone who treats people the way Mom treated us." Bryson didn't answer right away. He looked at this 15-year-old boy, the one who had dropped a book on a penthouse floor in the rain 3 months ago and disappeared into the dark, and felt something that had been sealed behind years of work and emotional distance and strategic patience finally release. "You won't," he said, "because you already know the difference between building something real and decorating the surface." In the weeks that followed, the apartment became something the penthouse and the Buckhead mansion had never been. It became a home. Not because of the square footage or the view from the windows, because of what happened inside it at night, At the kitchen table, in the quiet conversations that had nowhere specific to go and no agenda beyond honesty. Aidan started playing music again, quietly at first, just his acoustic guitar behind a half-closed door in the evenings, chord progressions drifting into the hallway like something tentative and hopeful. He bought a used notebook from the Goodwill on Church Street and started writing lyrics. He showed one to Bryson one evening with the reluctance of someone handing over something fragile, and Bryson read it carefully and said, "This is good." Aidan said, "You're just saying that." "I say what I mean," Bryson told him. "You know that by now." Aidan looked at the floor, then nodded. He started sharing things with his father, not only the significant things, but the small daily ones that had been accumulating in silence for years because there had been no one positioned to receive them. Observations, small frustrations, jokes that had nowhere to land. Bryson listened. He listened in a way he now understood was the most important skill he had neglected for the first decade of his son's life. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, one of which Aidan was technically too young for, but Bryson had stopped treating small things as battles worth having, Bryson said without preamble, "I owe you an apology." Aidan looked up. "I was present in the house," Bryson said, "but I wasn't present for you. There's a difference, and I understand now that you experience that difference every day." He paused. "I told myself that building a life for this family, for you, even for my wife, was enough. It wasn't." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I'm sorry for the years when you needed me, and I wasn't actually there." Aidan was quiet for a moment. "I always knew you loved me," he said finally. "I just couldn't feel it." "That's on me," Bryson said. "Yeah," Aidan said evenly. "It was." They sat with that. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest, and honest was the only foundation either of them had left to build on. So they built on it, one evening at a time. Meanwhile, Nadia's circumstances continued to unravel with the quiet efficiency of a process that had been set in motion long before the divorce papers had landed on the silk tablecloth. The penthouse was vacated within 60 days of the final property transfer. Her social media accounts, all of them, went inactive before the new year. The luxury vehicles she had been driving were returned when the lease agreements lapsed, and she could not cover the renewals. Her attorney's final billing statement went unanswered for 6 weeks before a collections process began. The friends she had cultivated across 14 years of expensive dinners and carefully curated proximity went quiet with the particular speed of people who had always been attached to the circumstances rather than the person herself. One by one, the visible structures of her constructed life were removed. Eventually, with no remaining options in the city, Nadia moved back to Southwest Atlanta, back to her mother's house in the neighborhood she had spent her entire adult life trying to leave behind. No penthouse, no following, no designer anything, no one beside her. Just the same quiet street she had grown up on, unchanged and patient, the way the things we run from have a habit of waiting. But Bryson and Aidan's story wasn't ending in a Decatur apartment. What they were building next, and where it was headed, was something that had been waiting for them all along. 2 years later, a Saturday morning in March, the kind that arrives in Atlanta like a quiet apology for February. Soft light, clean air, the dogwoods along West Paces Ferry Road just beginning to open their first white blossoms. The neighborhood had its Saturday morning sounds. A lawnmower somewhere down the block, children's voices from the next yard over, a dog barking at nothing in particular, the way dogs do when they are simply happy to be outside. Bryson Kane stood in the driveway of the Buckhead mansion. It had been repurchased 6 months earlier, through Aisha Thompson's office, using funds from the trust, completed quietly and without fanfare. The stone facade looked the same. The tall rear windows looked the same. The garden Bryson had always meant to properly tend now had a new raised bed along the south wall, planted last fall, already showing green. He looked different, though. He stood differently, less contained somehow, like a man who had set down something heavy he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. From the backyard came the sound of a basketball against the driveway, and voices. Aiden's voice, easy and unguarded, and 2 or 3 others, the particular noise of teenagers who have claimed a space entirely and are completely at home in it. Bryson listened without moving for a moment. Just listened. Earlier that morning, he and Aiden had planted a young oak sapling in the front yard, just left of the front walk where an old Bradford pear had come down in a storm the previous autumn. It was a modest thing, barely taller than Aiden, the trunk still thin and flexible, its new March leaves small and bright green. They had dug the hole together, which took longer than it needed to because neither of them was particularly skilled at the task, and they kept disagreeing good-naturedly about technique. Then they packed the soil around the roots together, pressing it firm with their hands. Aiden stepped back and looked at it. "It's going to take a long time to become a real tree," he said. "About 25 years, Bryson said, "if it's treated right." Aiden glanced at him. "You've been running 20-year plans since before I could walk. I figure you already know what it's going to look like." "I know what I hope," Bryson said. "Not what I know, what I hope." The distinction was deliberate, and Aiden heard it. "What do you hope?" Bryson looked at the sapling for a moment. "I hope someday you'll sit under it," he said, "with people you love, and not have to explain to them what it cost to plant it." Aiden was quiet. Then, "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you didn't fight her when she asked for everything." He paused, organizing the thought. "I'm glad you just let her take it." Bryson looked at his son. "I didn't let her take anything that mattered," he said. From the driveway, Bryson could hear the basketball game winding down. Aiden's voice, relaxed and unhurried, calling out something that made his friends laugh. A good sound. The uncomplicated laughter of a teenager who is not hiding, not waiting, not carrying the accumulated weight of a parent who treated him as an inconvenience. A sound that had been missing from this family for too many years to count. Aiden was not entirely healed. Bryson understood that clearly and would not have claimed otherwise. Wounds that begin in childhood, especially those made by a parent, do not resolve inside of 2 years. They resolve, if they resolve, across a lifetime of choosing differently. Aiden still had difficult nights, still had silences his father couldn't always reach, still carried, beneath the laughter and the music and the Saturday games, the memory of standing in the rain on Ponce de Leon Avenue at 7 years old, waiting for someone who never arrived. But he was standing. He was building. He was writing music and sharing it, playing basketball with friends in a yard that legally belonged to him, studying with the seriousness of someone who understands that a foundation is not given. It is constructed, carefully, over time, by a person who shows up for it. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Bryson closed his eyes for a moment, standing in the March light, and thought about something very simple. He had not won because of the trust, or the legal strategy, or the $55,000 a month, or the look on anyone's face in courtroom 7B. Those were instruments. They were means, not the thing itself. He had won because, at the lowest point, sitting on beige carpet in a Decatur apartment at midnight, holding a son who had quietly been breaking for years, he had finally chosen to be present. Not as a provider, not as a strategist, as a father, as the kind of person his son needed him to be, which was simply there. Everything else had followed from that one decision. This story teaches us 3 things worth writing down somewhere you'll actually see them. First, Greed doesn't feel like greed from the inside. It feels like survival. It feels like, I finally deserve this. Nadia never thought of herself as someone who abandoned her child. She thought of herself as someone who was finally free. That gap between how we see ourselves and what we actually do to the people who needed us, that is where the real damage lives. Pay attention to it in your own life, in the people around you. What someone repeatedly chooses, not what they say, not what they post, is the only honest autobiography they will ever write. Second, a man who builds quietly and patiently, without demanding an audience, will outlast almost every person who performs their strength loudly. If you have a son, a grandson, a nephew who is being underestimated right now, who is doing the slow, unsexy work of building something real, tell him this week specifically what you see in him. Not a card, a phone call, Tuesday evening, 5 minutes. Those words land differently than any inheritance. Third, the most important conversation you will ever have with your child is the one where you say, without excuses, I got that wrong, and here is exactly how. Not once, regularly, at the kitchen table, over reheated coffee, while the news plays in the background and nobody is keeping score. That is the foundation that holds. Be the one who owns the foundation. Never let anyone stand on your child's ground. Written from a human heart, with AI's support, this story only hopes to send you a warm message. Kindness is never wasted, and even when the world feels harsh, there is always the light of justice and beautiful things quietly returning to those who are kind. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.